Facebook stock is down big after hours after their earnings was a big miss. And a couple things that I wanted to talk about before we jump into a whole bunch of this. If you guys are outside of the US and you would actually like to invest in stocks, there is some great opportunities to check out the brokers down below in the description. Talking Facebook, the big drop was a massive 22%. I think we're trading pre-market at like 250. And if we take a quick look at the chart, you can see a massive drop after hours where we closed around 320. We are going to probably open around the 250 mark. Today to talk about what's going on with Facebook, I'm bringing in Garrett. He's a friend of mine. Garrett, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here, man. What's going on?
Hey man, happy to be here. Super excited to dive into all this stuff today. It's been a crazy week. Lots of stuff to talk about. So super excited.
So Facebook completely dropped like crazy. What's the reasoning? I know we had discussed this a little bit, and you probably are better qualified to talk about this than I am. What's the rundown for people who are like, "What just happened to my Facebook stock?" What's the take that you're seeing?
Yeah, so Facebook, it's an interesting story because I think before the earnings report came out, Facebook, if we think about like all the different FANG stocks, Facebook was probably one of the cheapest from like a PE standpoint. So, a lot of investors were like, okay, growth is still good. It's pretty cheap. I think a lot of hedge funds are pretty long Facebook. So going into earnings, there were pretty solid expectations. And then, earnings came out and, just bottom line, they missed earnings per share, which, was kind of a starting indicator that maybe something was up. And then as people started to kind of dive into, their earnings call and their transcript, and Nick, if you want to go ahead and show my screen, I've actually got some numbers pulled up here.
Sure.
So this is actually their fourth quarter earnings report, and on the surface, revenue actually slightly beat expectations. Like I said, earnings per share was slightly underneath expectations, but I think the biggest thing that people were looking at when it came to why Facebook was dropping so far after hours was really the guidance going into 2022. So if we look at kind of this top section here, there's quite a few areas that Facebook's CFO was kind of flagging as basically growth concerns moving forward. So first big thing that I wanted to talk about was the Apple iOS privacy changes that have been hitting, a lot of these social media companies that are specifically, a lot of their ad revenue is based on, the mobile app. So Facebook, right. Snap, Pinterest, that's been a big headwind for these companies.
Makes sense.
And the CFO said, going into 2022, I think their Q1 guidance ended up being like 3 billion less than what the street expected. So that was kind of the first headwind. The second headwind, I don't know. I think it's specifically mentioned in here. I know they talked about it quite a bit on the conference call, but competition has been a bigger impact on Facebook as well. So specifically TikTok, actually.
Okay.
Facebook was kind of behind the curve when it came to developing like Reels into their platform. And then obviously, Nick and your viewers probably know this, but just the demographic shift of Facebook from what used to be a younger crowd to maybe like an older crowd, and then the younger crowd is going to other social media platforms. I think that's also been a big headwind for them.
Sure.
And I think will most likely continue to be moving forward. And then lastly, they actually mentioned forex here as another headwind, which is not really my area of expertise, but it was just kind of an interesting thing to see. So
that is. Before going further in the video, I do want to say, make sure to check out Garrett on his actual social media profiles. He has Instagram and YouTube, and he puts out some excellent content. So check him out, Garrett Invests. So I have a question for you. So the stock drops big after hours, a little bit of headwinds. Do you see these as bumps in the road, or do you see them as actual shifts in the company's valuation? I mean, trading from 320 down to 250 is a really impressive drop. Do you think that is justified? Do you think it's overdone? And would you say, generally speaking, that it's more on the buy side in these areas, or kind of an avoid and wait for a bottom? What do you think?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think generally speaking, Wall Street is impatient and they want results super quickly. So I think that that's why you're seeing the drop, is because people aren't willing to wait as long as they think it's going to take for Facebook to overcome some of these challenges. I think longer term, there's still, a decent argument there for, success over the long run. So I think if you're like a long-term investor, it could be a pretty decent area to get in. But I think it's going to take probably at least a couple of quarters to really see what happens with a lot of like this advertising revenue issue when it comes to the Apple stuff, and then really the competitive growth concerns. And then obviously, we haven't even talked about the metaverse side of things. So if you're a believer that Facebook is going to be one of the leading players in that space, then I think it's a good entry point. And this has happened before with Facebook. We've seen, I think it was like 2018 when they had that whole what was it? Some like scandal. I think it was.
I remember it's some security thing or something. I remember.
Yeah, they had like a security thing, and then there was the some other thing. I'm blanking on what it was, but ultimately at the end of the day, it was a very similar experience where the stock dropped pretty heavily, and then in the long run, it ended up being a buying opportunity. But there's the other side of the coin is like, are you generally a believer in Facebook, right? Because I don't use Facebook personally. I don't see a lot of my friends using it. So like from a secular trend, is it potentially, kind of falling off a little bit? Yeah. You can make that argument. So,
well, and I think, the other half of it is they do own the Instagram platform, which is still very, very popular, which I would say is still a bullish thing, generally speaking, for Facebook, as they do have their exposure to the ancient Facebook platform, which is still used by surprisingly a huge number of people. But Instagram's still popular. But I do see, some of the other platforms coming in and being an issue, or being in terms of competition. Real quick, I do want to take just a quick look in terms of the charting and see what you think on this. So the weekly chart here, right? So longer term, we're talking a little bit longer term here. This is certainly a pullback. The question is it a pullback, or is it actually just a consolidation before for further downside? If you look at this level, you're talking about something, since we're talking about levels that we were sitting at in September of 2020. We sat around this area for a long period of time. I would just mark this on my chart, and personally, I'll just throw my take on it. I think it is sort of a longer term buy here. I personally think that when you get a major haircut on some of these like top 5 stocks in the U.S. stock market, so long as things continue to tread higher overall, Facebook, in my opinion, is still a buy, especially at these technical levels like you've got at 250. I know that there certainly is headwinds, but like you mentioned, we actually, back in the day, we've been investing in stocks together for a long time. We took some buys on Facebook on the dips, and I think that sometimes you have to wonder, is it really just a dip, or is it going to just dip further, right? But at these levels, my personal take is 250 is a bargain on this stock. I don't know. Would you say at this level, buy, sell, or hold? What are you thinking?
You know what? If there's something in between a hold and a buy,
okay,
that's kind of where my head's at.
A soft buy, we'll call it.
We'll call it a soft buy. And Nick, I think the other thing that I wanted to mention, before we get off today, that's working in Facebook's favor, couple things. So one, this is in their earnings report. So they like to report on like number of monthly active people. I mean, 3.59 billion people using Facebook every month. And granted, that's like, all of their products, but if you think about it, like that's a lot of data that they have access to. There's just so many ways that you could think about monetizing that, to where, I could see Facebook being okay. Obviously, like that's huge potential there for
sure.
Just even things that they don't have today from like a growth standpoint. And then the other thing that I wanted to talk about just briefly is just kind of like the ad revenue market in general. So one thing that I thought was interesting was like Google obviously had, a really, really good quarter, and that probably was related to the fact that, Facebook, had the Apple privacy concerns, and advertisers felt like it was a better bang for their buck to go with like a Google. But I feel like those kinds of, advertising issues are very like cyclical. So you could see, marketers and advertisers shifting back over to Facebook over time, if Facebook comes out with something new. So I don't think what we're currently seeing is necessarily what's going to happen in the future. So that could work for Facebook, but there's just no telling long term what will happen. So
Sure. Yeah, and that actually, funny you mentioned that in comparison to Google. Google for me is a large position that I personally have, but so is Facebook. I own both of the stocks. The idea being, like you kind of mentioned, the advertising space. Those two are like prominent names. I mean, just consistent pumping in of viewers and readers and growth on these, like you just mentioned, the monthly active people. Those are ultimately dollar signs in the pockets for these big companies. Now, I bought both because I couldn't make a decision. I like both companies. They both are money-making machines overall. And I guess to your point about monthly active users, it's really about, is that trend, and watching that very closely, that trend between a growing subscriber base, a continued growth there, and a declining one. It just a real quick touch on Snapchat, for example, which let me see what that stock is doing. I'll pull it up for a second and just see what this guy's doing. So Snapchat, weekly chart, we had like an explosion after they still had a pretty surprising growth in terms of users, which personally, just anecdotally, I'm not a big fan of Snapchat. I don't use it too much. I know we have a group chat that we every once in a while send messages in, but for me personally, it's not like a huge user thing. But really, it's more that's where these big, huge, user reliable or companies that rely on a huge user base make or break their money. So what do you think on just Snapchat and overall growth in terms of subscriber usage for a lot of these big tech companies?
Yeah, so lots of things to talk about there that are spinning in my head. So first thing with Snap, I think where they have an advantage over Facebook is the younger demographic, right? So we mentioned it earlier, Facebook over time has struggled to, at least Facebook, the platform, not thinking about this Instagram or whatever. Right. Facebook over time has struggled to keep, the younger demographic, I guess you could even say happy, right? Like people over time have migrated to other social media platforms. And I think Snapchat has been kind of the beneficiary of that alongside of Instagram. So I think moving forward, Snapchat continues to be well positioned with that demographic, and that demographic, in terms of growth, I think still has a lot of opportunity. But I think at the same time, one thing that we haven't mentioned today that I would say there's like two big stories for this week, or maybe this, even year to date. It's like FANG and how has FANG performed, and then the Fed, right? And we haven't even talked about the Fed, but,
of course,
with what the Fed is doing when it comes to like raising rates, I think that that's going to be a headwind for the Snapchats of the world, because I haven't actually looked yet, but I'm pretty sure they're still not profitable. So, they're going to have to continue to raise money, and they're going to have to do that in two ways. One is going to be going back to the equity markets, which is not ideal, right? Because then you're putting more shares on the market, and current investors get diluted, and that's typically not a great thing. Or you have to go to the debt market, right? But with interest rates rising, ultimately that's going to be more expensive over time. So, but I think that with the way that Snapchat's going, and the other social media companies such as Facebook that have proven that they can be profitable, I think Snap could be okay over time.
Interested in seeing our trades live as they happen? By joining the A1 Trading Discord, you'll get a notification every time one of our traders enters a position. Each trade we share comes with an entry price, a stop loss, and most importantly, a full breakdown of why the trade was taken. Learn alongside our experienced traders, join our active chat room, and ask your questions in our coaching webinars. Between our team of active traders, we trade forex pairs, commodities like gold and oil, crypto, and stocks. By joining the group, you'll be able to keep up with all of it. Sign up today using the link in the description. And don't forget to use our promo code listed below for a special subscriber discount. Thanks for watching, and see you inside.